So, I'm Dr. Maria Freire. When I was 15 years old, one of my classmates announced that she was going to be a biochemist. Well, I wasn't about to be left behind, so I blurted out, I'm going to be a biophysicist. Now, you can understand I had no idea what that meant. But in school, the nuns had put us, about 100 girls, in 3 tracks, track A, track B, and track C. And it was depending on your abilities. Those in track A knew about mathematics, and we were what you would call the geeks. The girls in tracks B and C were actually the cool girls. But those of us in track A1 had enormous enthusiasm for what we were doing. We had great fun, and we had hoped to have successful careers. Well, as you can imagine, having a career in Peru in the 1970s was not usually the track most women would take. However, 3 graduations later, a wedding, a child, and a continent away, those words that I blurted out so glibly became true. I got my PhD in biophysics from the University of Virginia. Now, it would be gratifying to say that it was all perfectly well planned and executed. But the truth of the matter was that that was not the case. My life has been a series of inflection points, decisions that appeared to be logical, even simple. But those logical and simple decisions made remarkable changes and unexpected consequences in my life. Well, as many of you know, when you're a scientist, the path is relatively clear and well-defined. You get first your doctorate degree, and you find postdoctoral fellowships where you hone in your talents and your skills, and this is followed usually by a career either in academia or in industry. And it culminates with the great hope that you will be able to get fabulous funding so that you can do amazing research that will lead to discoveries that will change human history. That's our dream, right? So I was on my second postdoc. I had followed my husband, who was a brand new assistant professor, to his first professorship. My son had been born 3 months earlier, and we settled in fairly nicely. But after 2 years, something was wrong. Something was amiss. Now, I still loved science, and I certainly enjoyed the people I worked with, and the mountains in Tennessee were absolutely fabulous. But I was so unhappy. And it hit me. I just didn't want to be in the lab anymore. And you can imagine, that was heresy. I had been trained to be an assistant professor, then an associate professor, then a full professor. That's what I was supposed to do. So now, what was I going to do with all this knowledge and all this information? How was I going to tap all that I had learned? And that was the real challenge for me. So what I did is I was trying to think of a different way to use my science skills. In a nutshell, how was I going to make all this work? How was I going to make it more relevant to people? Well, life has a very funny way of opening doors in the most unexpected places. Now, in my case, it was in a town called Texarkana. And it's in the border between Texas and Arkansas. I was in a bus going to a scientific meeting when the bus stopped at a gas station. Now, it was a gas station that was in the middle of nowhere, but I went down and I started looking to see what was around, and there was a reading rack. A rinky-dinky reading rack that had some comic books. It had those folded maps that you folded in many different ways. It had 2 or 3 books, and it had some magazines. Of course, at the time, there were no cell phones, there was no Waze, there was certainly no video games. But I decided to pick up the only book that was not about cowboys. And I also picked up a glamour magazine. I read for the 7 hours left in my trip. I was reading this book. It's a book called Having It All by Helen Gurley Brown. I realized that my life was about to change. This is a woman that had taken charge of who she was, of her work, of her sexuality, and most importantly, she had taken charge of her life. And I realized then and there that that's what I needed to do. No more excuses, no more sadness. I was going to take charge of my life, and I was going to write my own story. So when I arrived in San Antonio, I was walking around, and in the convention center, I spotted a homemade pasted flyer in a column, and it said Congressional Science Fellowship. And I thought, I wonder what that's about. That sounds interesting. And of course, by now, I was emboldened with this newfound power, and I decided to apply. What did I have to lose? A few months later, I was in Washington, D.C. And it turned out to be a journey of discovery. It was a transition from being a lab scientist to figuring out how to do science policy. In Washington, I learned how laws were made in the United States. I saw firsthand the dramatic impact that data, when it is well explained, in fact has enormous impact on the way and can change the lives and the understanding of the world. And I also realize the huge, huge benefit of having the systematic, analytical mind that a scientific education provides, especially when you need to make very difficult decisions. The role of science policy is not well understood, and frankly, even less appreciated by many people. Yet, every aspect of our lives and every important decision that needs to be made and recommendations that need to be had have critical effect in the changes of society, and understanding the scientific underpinning of those decisions is absolutely critical. I continued my journey, and one of the things I learned is how to transfer technology from the laboratory to the bedside. Now, for those of you who have never tried to do that, it is a very complicated process. It's fraught with disappointments, but when it works, it is absolutely exhilarating. This led me to head the Office of Technology Transfer at the U.S. National Institutes of Health. The NIH is the largest public biomedical entity in the world, so it was quite an honor. 2 weeks into my job, I get this phone call. Hi, Maria. My name is Frances Collins, and I want to talk to you about the Human Genome Project. Well, right then and there, another unexpected, unplanned, and revolutionary door opened for me. You see, at the time, nobody really knew what sequencing the human genome meant. What were these genes? Who owned them? Could we patent them? Who owned the patents? And so there I was, in the middle of this head-spinning effort by scientists and lawyers and advocates and lawmakers, all working to develop policies and guidelines to what gene patenting and how gene patenting could and would be done. And those policies and patents still have an effect today, not only in the United States, but around the world. Now, it has been many, many, many years since I've been in a laboratory, and I can assure you that's a very good thing. I could be very dangerous in a laboratory these days. But even so, biomedical research has remained my passion and has been my guiding light. I have had the honor of recognizing remarkable scientists, women and men, by bestowing the Lasker, the Lurie, and the Trailblazer Prizes. I have been able to enable and support great science, usually in large collaborative projects that have had, and I hope will continue to have, positive impact for the lives of people around the world. And I had the great privilege to be the first CEO of the TB Alliance. It started as a three-person enterprise, and it became a global coalition of scientists, physicians, nurses, and patients all over the world. We produced not only a new tuberculosis drug, but beyond that, a new paradigm for the development of combination therapies. And it is equally a privilege, as president of the foundation of the NIH, a position I just left, to create ACTIV, the Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Innovation and Vaccine Partnership. We launched ACTIV very, very early in the pandemic. It was very early in the year. The days and the nights ran together. Rest was a luxury we did not have. But despite the terrible, terrible toll that this pandemic has taken, the public and private sectors working together, hand in hand, has been a pivotal moment for science and for public health. Well, as scientists, we have the responsibility, indeed the obligation, to educate, to explain, not just to scientists, to inspire them, but to the general public. When science is understood, and most importantly, appreciated and trusted, that's when we will unlock the real potential of science. Now, I wear my scientist hat very proudly. I've worn it in the lab, I have worn it as a policymaker, as an advocate, and I've worn it as a patient. My life has had many ups and downs. It has been and continues to be fabulous, although admittedly not for the faint of heart. I have been, in fact, very, very lucky. And oh, that Glamour magazine? Well, I read that too. And they asked for nominations for 10 outstanding working women. Now, this was 1985, and I figured, how many biophysicists could possibly apply? So, to this day, I keep a beautiful Tiffany paperweight on my desk because it reminds me to take risks and to be the one to write my own life history. Thank you very much.